Blazing Saddles is one of those films where the studio genuinely could not touch it, because Mel Brooks had final cut written into his contract, and that single clause changed the entire fate of the movie. 50 years later, the film is still remembered as offensive, hilarious, and utterly unforgettable, yet buried within its history is a small detail that almost nobody caught for decades. Between fart jokes, Yiddish-speaking gunfighters, a disastrous casting process, and scenes that were simply too much even for Brooks to release, the real story behind the film is far messier and more fascinating than most people realize. To understand why the movie mattered so much, you have to remember what America looked like in 1974. The country was reeling from the shame of Vietnam and the unraveling of Watergate, with Nixon's resignation looming and public trust in institutions at a low point. The civil rights movement had achieved real legal victories, but racism was still woven into everyday life, and nowhere was that more visible than in Hollywood westerns, which routinely cast white men as heroes while everyone else faded into the background. Brooks didn't just want to poke fun at the genre. He wanted to tear it apart completely. Although the story is set in the Old West, it functions as a mirror for 1970s America. A greedy land developer wants to empty out a town called Rock Ridge so he can seize the land, and the scheme involves convincing the governor to appoint a black sheriff, assuming the townsfolk will panic and abandon the place. Instead, the new sheriff, Bart, played by Cleveland Little, turns out to be smarter and more capable than anyone anticipated, and what starts as a cruel prank spirals into a strange, boundary-breaking rebellion against both the villains and the narrow-minded town itself. Underneath the slapstick is a sharper idea. That racism, once dragged into the light and mocked, starts to fall apart. That's part why the film unsettled so many people. Audiences weren't accustomed to hearing racial slurs used in a comedy, even when the joke was aimed squarely at the bigots using them. And they certainly weren't used to seeing a black protagonist consistently outsmart every white authority figure around him. Brooks didn't write the film alone. Richard Pryor, one of the boldest comedic voices of the era, co-wrote the script and helped mold Bart into someone who was not only cool and quick-witted, but fully conscious of how ridiculous the situation was. Pryor had actually been considered to play the role himself, but the studio wouldn't insure him because of his past struggles with substance use, a decision that likely reshaped the entire tone of the finished film. Cleveland Little brought a theatrical polish and dry wit to the part instead, while Pryor's fingerprints remained all over the writing, which took aim at everyone: racists, politicians, cowboys, actors, and old guard studio executives alike. The film wasn't interested in being tactful. It wanted to provoke a reaction, and then make the audience laugh at how absurd that reaction was, blending lowbrow gags with sharp satire in a way that no studio would likely greenlight today. Even the ending reflects this anarchic spirit, as the story literally breaks out of its own fictional setting, spilling across the real Warner Brothers lot, through other film sets, and into a theater screening the very movie the audience is watching. It's chaotic and self-aware in a way that predates similar techniques used decades later in films like Deadpool. But even amid all that boldness, there was a moment cut from the film that was considered too extreme to include, something that stayed hidden in interviews and behind-the-scenes recollections for years before resurfacing. In the finished movie, there's a brief, flirtatious bedroom scene between the glamorous saloon singer Lily Von Stupp, played by Madeline Kahn, and Sheriff Bart. What audiences saw was tame compared to what was originally filmed. In the deleted version, the scene continued further into innuendo, playing on a well-worn stereotype about black male anatomy, before pivoting into a dry, self-deprecating punchline from Bart. It was a moment that combined race, physical comedy, and social commentary all at once, arguably more daring than anything that made the final cut, and yet Brooks chose to shelve it. He's spoken about this decision in interviews, including one with Conan O'Brien, explaining that the scene felt like it crossed from satire into something that risked overshadowing the rest of the film. There were other trims as well, including a suggestive line about Bart removing his gun belt that was clearly meant to carry a second meaning, and even more physical version of the seduction scene that existed only in early drafts, where the innuendo escalated further before being undercut by Bart's characteristically unbothered reaction. Brooks has since admitted, in later interviews, that he may have pulled back more than necessary, wondering aloud whether fear of being misunderstood caused him to soften some of the film's edges. It raises an interesting question about how the film might have been received and remembered had those scenes stayed in, though there's no way to know for certain. What is clear is that these weren't gratuitous choices. They were part of a broader effort to strip away Hollywood's polite, sanitized approach to storytelling and expose racism as a system built on fear and ignorance rather than logic. The film's willingness to push boundaries wasn't limited to dialogue. The campfire scene, where cowboys eat beans and audibly pass gas, marked the first time a major Hollywood film had ever included that kind of sound effect so openly. Brooks didn't shy away from it. He actually added more gas sounds after test audiences laughed so hard they missed the next line of dialogue. Studio executives hated it, calling it crude and pointless, but Brooks kept it anyway, understanding that stripping cowboys of their mythic, stoic image and showing them as sweaty, flawed, and human was exactly the point. That same appetite for chaos carried into the film's climactic brawl, which spills out of the fictional town and directly onto the real studio lot. During that sequence, an actual bystander in a sweater wandered into frame while cameras were rolling, completely unaware he was walking into film history. Rather than cut the shot, Brooks kept it in, recognizing that the man's confused, oblivious presence only added to the absurdity. Improvisation shaped much of the film in similar ways. Gene Wilder often adjusted his lines as the Waco Kid on the spot. Cleveland Little brought dry, understated reactions that weren't written into the script, and Madeline Kahn improvised several of her most memorable moments as Lily Von Stupp. Brooks embraced this unpredictability, rather than try and control it, believing that a well-timed accident could land harder than a scripted joke. That philosophy is on full display in the flashback, where Bart, as a child, encounters a group of Native American warriors on horseback. Just as it seems the scene is heading toward tragedy, the tribal chief, played by Brooks himself, begins speaking fluent Yiddish, and the other warriors respond in kind. It's a jarring, surreal choice, but a deliberate one, calling attention to how Hollywood Westerns had long reduced indigenous characters to faceless, voiceless stereotypes. A similar layer of irony runs through the film's opening theme song, sung with total sincerity by the veteran Western vocalist Frankie Lane, who reportedly had no idea he was recording for a comedy. His powerful, heartfelt delivery clashes perfectly with the exaggerated, cliché-ridden lyrics, creating a joke that works precisely because the performer never lets on that he's in on it. Behind the scenes, the production faced its own turmoil. When Warner Brothers executives first watched the finished film, the screening room reportedly went silent. Some called it too vulgar. Others predicted it would end careers. Yet Brooks had legal control over the final cut, meaning the studio couldn't alter or censor his work without permission, a level of authority that terrified executives given how many rules the film broke. Studio head Ted Ashley reportedly wanted the film released quietly in a handful of cities, and then pulled without fanfare, a common strategy for movies the studio didn't believe in. Brooks pushed forward anyway, confident in what he'd made, even though the production leading up to that point had been rocky. Pryor's inability to secure insurance due to his past drug-related arrest forced the studio to cast Cleveland Little instead. Then Gig Young, originally cast as the alcoholic gunslinger the Waco Kid, collapsed on his first day of filming due to alcohol withdrawal, halting production entirely. Brooks scrambled and called Gene Wilder, who had worked with him previously on the producers. Wilder agreed almost immediately, flew out, and began shooting the next day, delivering a performance that became one of the film's most beloved elements. Even John Wayne turned down a cameo, reportedly telling Brooks the material was too risque for his image, though he apparently promised to be first in line to see it once it was released. Despite all the doubt surrounding it, the film's limited release in New York, Los Angeles, and exaggeration, particularly intense moments like the scene where Bart takes himself hostage to escape a lynch mob. Gene Wilder's performance as the Waco Kid balanced spaced-out wisdom with dry sarcasm, giving the film emotional grounding amid the absurdity, and his chemistry with Lil became one of his defining relationships. Harvey Korman, playing the scheming Hedley Lamar, walked a careful line between theatrical villainy and outright parody, treating the character seriously enough that the jokes about people mispronouncing his name landed even harder. That particular running gag, which referenced actress Hedy Lamarr, actually prompted her to threaten legal action, leading Brooks to settle privately rather than fight it in court. Rounding out the cast, former NFL defensive lineman Alex Karras played the horse-punching brute Mongo, bringing surprising deadpan comic timing to a role that could easily have been one note. Together, this group of actors thrived under a director willing to hand them creative freedom, embracing a film that wasn't just trying to get laughs, but was using humor as a tool to expose absurdity, challenge complacency, and push the boundaries of what mainstream comedy was allowed to say. Chicago turned into an unexpected sensation, with theaters extending their runs and Warner Brothers scrambling to expand distribution. By the end of its theatrical run, Blazing Saddles had earned more than $100 million, becoming the biggest comedy of the year thanks to a director who refused to back down. The ensemble cast played a huge role in making that happen. Cleveland Little brought a controlled, ironic energy to Bart that made the satire land with precision rather than